Hi, I'm James Knott, and this is your Better Beer Authority. Tonight, we say goodbye to a good friend, Mark Smith. He's been reviewing beers with us for almost 2 years and is now moving because of work. And we just wanted to find out what he got out of this. Mark, when you started the show, did you have any expectations for what it would be like? Did it match the expectations?
You know, coming into the show, I really didn't have any kind of expectation. I met you and a lot of the other guys at the BBA at the Columbus Beer Festival I think it was in the spring of, 2010? 2009, 2010?
That's about right.
Or 2010, yeah. And, you guys said that you were looking for a new reviewer, and I was like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. I enjoy craft beer, and some guys that get together and talk about craft beer, I thought that would be a pretty cool idea, so I had no expectations whatsoever coming into it, but when I found that you guys were actually getting together and, filming the show and putting it online, I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. It's a little bit of a hype to live up to, but I didn't expect to get anything out of it, but I was so prepared to put as much into it as I could, and I thought that was really cool that, I was actually contributing to the craft beer community in some way, shape, or form. So I thought it was a lot of fun, but while I had no expectations going into it, I got so much more out of it than I could have imagined.
What did you get out of it?
I think that what I got out of it was not only a more well-rounded knowledge and experience of craft beer, but knowing that the craft beer community out there is so vast and ever-growing even. There's always somebody who is contributing and people that have something to say and, something new to bring to it, that there is an entire homebrew scene out there, and even the craft breweries are just ever-expanding and trying to do something new and something bigger, something bolder, something better. And, I think it's cool because we're on the forefront of an ever-growing community where people want to spread the word about good craft beer, and they even send the beer to us because they want us to review it, because one person out there may not be able to spread the word about beer, but one person can send the beer to us and we can spread the word for them. And I think the BBA is actually doing, I think even Sam Calagione once said, that Beer Advocate was doing God's work, and I think even we as the BBA are doing God's work by reviewing some of these amazing craft beers and letting people know what we think and what to expect and what more is to come.
Do you have a favorite moment with the show?
That's really tough to answer because one of my favorite moments was just starting out when we did 16 Mile back when even 16 Mile itself was in its infancy, back when they were doing those dumbass aluminum bottles.
Well, that was the first brewery to ever send us a beer.
Yeah, and while I very much thank them for that, it was an idea that really got led astray, but I remember that because, not only my first brew experience, but what really stands out to me were the moments that I had, with you guys and just having fun and trying new beers and, all the times that I made an ass out of myself for, making a false claim about some beer where, I was like, oh, well, this is what it tastes like to me, but I was completely wrong, All those moments mean a lot to me because it's just a learning experience.
I mean, do you have like a low moment where you think like you were really off?
I think I've probably had several of those. I can't really recall one particular moment, but I think when we did, Chimay Blue, maybe, I think I was way off the radar. And I think actually there might have been somebody that called me out on that, but, shit happens. And
So, one moment that sticks out to me was when we went and did the interview at Dogfish Head. I mean, you, more than anybody on the whole thing, was very, very excited. I mean, you needed a shopping cart to get out of the gift shop. That was the most excited I'd seen you, was that morning. And when we went to Dogfish Head. And had you always had that love for Dogfish Head?
I've always been a huge fan of Dogfish Head for a couple of reasons, because I know that, for one, Sam Calagione and the crew that he runs in Milton, Delaware, have been so instrumental and experimental in the forefront of the craft beer scene. They've done so much, and it's been inspirational for me because I can definitely get behind a guy that wants to break the mold and try new things and do new things. And that always inspired me to try new beers. And so I think at first it might have been Great Lakes Brewing in Cleveland, Ohio, where I found a brewery that I really fell in love with, and I said, I can get behind this brewery because I know they make quality beers. And so I've always been real faithful because the character of their beers stays relatively the same. And so anytime they come out with a new brew or an experimental brew or some kind of rack-aged, barrel-aged brew, I'm always very comfortable with it. And I feel the same way about Dogfish Head because they're so bold and they do things that other craft breweries out there don't do. And we know among the BBA and the craft beer scene especially, we know so many craft breweries that really stick to the certain stipulations to make a good beer, but not a great beer. And I think that Dogfish Head on so many levels has made multiple great beers and not just good beer. And that's why, I've always loved them from the beginning.
So if you're going to give advice to someone who's just starting to get into drinking like beer and, trying to appreciate new beers, what kind of advice would you give to them?
The best advice I could give to anybody that really wants to crack the craft beer scene and try something new is just to keep an open mind, because there's no way of knowing what you're going to like and what you won't like until you give it a shot. I've taken a couple of wild shots out there on beers where, I was very hesitant and I wasn't sure that it was going to be a great thing, but, I hate to bring up Dogfish Head multiple times, but Midas Touch was one of them. It sounded weird to have a beer that was, brewed with saffron and muscat grapes and things like that, muscat grapes, and ended up being amazing. Or a beer like Lagunitas, where they made little something something. I wasn't sure where a beer that was going to be brewed in the style of a wheat ale, but ended up tasting more like an IPA, but it was just kind of a combination of the two. Turned out to be one of my favorite beers that I've ever had. The best thing that I can say is to keep an open mind, because unless you've actually had a sour ale or a Trappist ale or an IPA or an APA, don't judge it until you try it,
What are some of the best beers that you've had here on the show?
I remember this is a way back when, but I remember bringing in Okachim Porter. It was a Baltic Porter, and I remember loving that beer on several different reasons. And my acclaim for it was that you got a lot of beer that tasted great with high ABV and a low price. I remember enjoying that a lot, and like I said before, I remember really enjoying Lagunitas, little something something. And I've even enjoyed recently what we've been doing with the blind taste tests. And we can see that a lot of the comments that we've had on the episodes that we've put out recently, that the crowd has really had great reception to what we're doing with the blind taste tests. And I can say that, Zombie Dust was actually really great. And I think it's really cool that we haven't had a lot of beers from this part of the country, or even Indiana, but, Three Floyds really put out quite an amazing beer.
Well, the cool thing about Zombie Dust is there's a lot of hype that goes with it. If we had just poured it and it was like, hey, it's Three Floyds, it's Zombie Dust, that would have been a very weighted review to not know going into it and still have a really positive review. I loved that beer. I thought it was great.
I thought it was a great beer too, but I think that Three Floyds Brewing even goes along the same lines as Cigar City Brewing, less known breweries that do amazing beer. And that's what I want people to try and seek out. It's really easy for us to stick to our staples, and I get a little upset when people say that Boston Lager is an amazing craft beer. Not that I think it's a shitty beer, but I get upset when people think that it's a great craft beer because there's so much more going out there with so much more complexity and heart that goes into it. And I'm not trying to bash the fact that Jim Koch and his brewers, I'm not saying that they're not doing great things with craft beer, But I think that they have their certain recipes and the certain strictures that they're sticking to. But I think that some of these other craft breweries that are really breaking out of the mold and really going bold are doing a lot more for craft beer. And those are the breweries that I really want people to try and reach out and touch.
Well, the interesting thing about you is that for most of the show, I mean, it's Joby and Scott and Chef, and we just kind of started out as like friends who didn't really know that much about beer, but just wanted to try new beers. You were the first guy who actually came in kind of as an outsider and kind of already had an interest in beer. I mean, when you came in, you were at least at our level or higher. So that I thought that was a unique aspect to bring to the show. I mean, do you feel like you kind of have the same viewpoint on beer as the other guys, or is there differences in how you guys see beer?
Well, I think that there were actually a lot of differences between the lot of us, the reviewers that we had, because I think everybody going into it in the beginning, and I know that the Better Beer Authority was going on for several months before I had come around, but I think that everybody was very individual and had their own unique taste in beers. And I think, I'm not going to try and call out Joby, but I know that he was a little bit more primitive when it came to his taste in beer because he was stuck on, the more BMC beers. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but he was very young in his craft beer experience. And so he came into it with a very fresh outlook because he didn't really know a lot about craft beer coming into it. But guys like Adam Harms and Scott Blicken, and they knew a little bit more about craft beer, but really hadn't delved into everything that the craft beer scene had to offer. And I would say from about 2005, 6, and 7, I had tried to open up a little bit more to the craft beer scene. And especially when I got back to the States in late 2008 and then going into 2009, I really wanted to learn as much about the craft beer scene as I could. So I tried everything I could. And even though Leinenkugels is not the greatest craft beer contributor to the scene, I was really happy to try like 1888 Bock and, their Red Lager and their, Sunset Wheat and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, these beers are really good. These are different kind of styles. And so I started finding styles that I liked. And I was like, wow, this wheat beer is really good. Well, let me try another kind of wheat beer. And so I started digging a little bit more into Goose Island, even though they are not all that kind of crafty because they're owned by, Michelob now?
Well, they're owned by Budweiser.
Budweiser,
they were
yeah.
at the time. At the time, they were still Goose Island.
Yeah, so, and they still brew good beers like, Floor and things like that. And but, coming into the show, I realized that these guys are probably in the same place I am. They just have a different upbringing. Even you had your certain take on beers, and I think that we've all kind of grown up together. We've learned to appreciate hops together. We've learned to appreciate certain malts together. I think collectively we started finding a better way to appreciate beer together, which I think is really cool.
Mark, it's been great having you on the Better Beer Authority. Hope you come back to visit.
I would love to.
We have an open seat for you any night. That's Mark Smith, a 2-year reviewer on the Better Beer Authority. This is his last night. We appreciate his service. I'm James Knott, and this is your Better Beer Authority.
Better Beer Authority, Better Beer